My name is Robert McCabe. I go by the name of Bob, and most people know me by Bob. I was born in a mining camp, and at that time my father worked in the lead mines in southwest Wisconsin. After I got to be 17 and the war started, I asked my mother in January, could I join the United States Navy because they needed men. She hee-hawed for about 4 months, 5 months, and finally I convinced her, yeah, maybe I should. Maybe I should let him go. And so she finally signed the papers, and on August the 15th, 1943, I was inducted into the Navy in Dubuque, Iowa, and was sent to Des Moines, Iowa, for transportation to Farragut, Idaho. That's a long ways from home. And I was proud to be a U.S. Navy man. I thought, boy, this is what I want. And when I got to the boot camp in Farragut, Idaho, everybody who was already there, they started saying, sucker, sucker, you'll be sorry. But I was never sorry one day in my life with the U.S. Navy. I completed my boot camp, was transferred over to Bremerton, Washington by Seattle. I was there one day, and I was ordered to report to the USS Enterprise. October 28th, 29th, somewhere in that area, and I sailed the next day. It was on a Saturday I got there, and on a Sunday morning we sailed into the Pacific Ocean. I was seasick. Took 7 days to get to Pearl Harbor from Bremerton, and we were, our group joined our ship, and we proceeded to the Gilbert Islands in November, but I don't remember the date we got down there. And that was the first offensive battle that the United States Navy participated in. And that was the Marshall Islands and the Gilbert Islands. In the meantime, I was assigned from being a sailor to the engineering department to learn about electricity. They had 2 electrical systems. They had the back half of the ship, and that had 2 major generators, and they were capable of putting out 1,000 kWs, kilowatts of power. The front part of the ship, they had 2 generators also in the front of the ship, and they took care of the front part of it. And if anything happened down in the back part or in the front part, and the main generators were knocked out, they had an emergency diesel down below that deck, and that's where my battle station was. Below me was oil tanks, and below that was water. When I was taught the electrical system, I had to operate that diesel by myself, alone, nobody else in the compartment, and I learned how to do it, and I was taught. I made my ranking, and we had enough power to take care of a city of 30,000 people for 1 month. That's how much power we had on that ship for the electricity, for the guns, for the lighting, air conditioning wherever necessary, and the steering. When you're down in the bottom of the ship, more or less, and you don't see what's going on up above, because you're in a different part of it. You're on the ship's, what they call the ship's company. And the ship's company are a group of sailors or trained people who know how to operate the ship and keep it going, to keep it afloat. The people on top side were the ones who were taking care of the airplanes, the landing of the planes, supplying them with bombs, ammunition, and that was on the top part of the ship. There was more of the ship underwater than there was on top of the water, even though the flight deck was quite high. So being down in the bottom of the ship, we could only listen by earphones with a helmet on and flash-proof clothing in case there was an explosion. during the battle. We would hear over the air pieces, there was a bogey in the sky. And they were going to try to knock that bogey out of the sky. They were unidentified. So we had 5-inch shells. And I could hear those down in the bottom of the ship. And we could hear them go, boom, boom. We knew we were in for something. And then the 40 millimeters, which were 4 guns in each battery, would start shooting left, right, and go boom, 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 until such time we thought, oh boy, they're going to knock them out of the sky. And then a few minutes later, we heard the 20 millimeters, which is like a machine gun, going boom, 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 as fast as it could go. And it was, oh, we're getting in trouble. And so the plane is still coming, or whatever it was. And we're just waiting, and all of a sudden, boom, it'll be maybe a near miss, or another near miss. And then another plane would come in, and over and over and over. I was terrified because I had no idea what was going to happen. I didn't know if we were going to get hit and we're going to get sunk, and I was quite upset. But these other men who were there, and he says, hang on, Bob, it's going to be all right. It's going to be fine. And being a young man at 17, 18 years old, because that's the way it was. And it's quite an experience if you've never been under attack by dive bombers, and torpedo planes, and everything else. The USS Franklin was sailing off of our starboard side. we were under general quarters, which means general quarters is everything locked down. All the hatches are all locked down that you're not supposed to break those seals. And each compartment on the Enterprise would be like an airtight compartment to keep your buoyancy. So if it did get damaged, the damage would not go to the next compartment. I was transferred from the bottom of the ship to the hangar deck to be on damage control. And damage control was a group of people that, if a fire came, we'd take the hoses and put the fires out, or whatever. If they were wounded people, we would take care of them and bring them back to and get them attention. The Franklin was supposed to be on general quarters, but they were on what they call condition 2, which means everything below the third deck was dogged down, locked on. The Franklin was landing these planes, and the story goes that one of the spotters said there's a different engine out there. I can hear a different engine, but nobody paid any attention to it. And it was a kamikaze from Japan who got into the landing circle and dropped a bomb on the Franklin and exploded a lot of ammunition and a lot of bombs that were on planes that were just getting ready to take off. 1,000 men were killed. The chaplain of the Franklin was given, I think, the presidential citation, I thought, now if I remember right, but that ship took about a 28-degree list, which means that ship was tipped over because it was so damaged. Then our job was to go around that ship and circle that ship until they got it going again, because it was dead in the water. And they started towing it out to save the Franklin to take back to the United States to sell war bonds. And some of the people down below the flight deck, they were stuck in the ventilation system trying to get out, and they died. And when we were under attack for almost 12, 14 hours circling that ship, and we took a lot of near misses, but we finally got them protected to get that ship out of there, and they hauled it back to the United States. Well, in the meantime, we still were under battle because we were trying to get troops into the Okinawa area. Kamikaze came in at water level between a destroyer who was off our port side and the ship. And he came in, and we did not knock it down, and I was at frame. The ship is divided into frames. They're like 2x4s, we call them now, but they were called frames. That's where the strength of the ship was. I was at frame 138, and the Kamikazers hit the side of the Enterprise. The rest of it was sticking out. I think there's a picture in my book. And the bomb went underneath the keel. The keel is two long things under the ship to stabilize it as it's going through the water. I was at frame 138. The bomb went underneath there and exploded, and that was at frame 142. And a minute it exploded, the main generators and the aft of the ship went completely dead. And I'm in this place all by my lonesome. And I thought, boy, this is it. No lights, no nothing, absolutely black. I couldn't see nothing in front of me. So I heard this. I heard shh. And I thought water was coming into the compartment. Because I was below me it was just oil tanks. I didn't have a chance to do anything, and all of a sudden the lights started coming back on because the diesel was starting to work. Now my job was to make sure that that switchboard had enough power to run the steering and the guns up above and emergency lighting. There is such a thing called a damage control pump. When that bomb struck, it started the damage control pump. Well, I was taking most of my electricity, most of my amps. So I had to ask for permission to secure the pump because there was no water down there. I was very lucky. And so I got permission to shut that pump off. And I went to the board to make sure I was getting my voltage up in my amps. And then I happened to think, boy, oh boy, I was on a wire grating, and below me was bilges. It's kind of curved. And we had raisin jack that we were making prior to that down in the bilge, and the bilge, the odor of the raisin jack would go right up the ventilation system so nobody would know about it. Raisin jack is a concoction that the Navy men would try to make. It was consisted of raisins and yeast, sugar, and it was going to be an alcohol, and it was really going to be good. We would shut the air conditioning off for the galley, and they would call down and say, hey, what's going on? We don't have no electricity. And say, well, we got an electrical problem. And he said, we'll try to fix it in an hour and a half, 2 hours. He said, well, you got to do better than that. And I said, well, we need food. And he said, what do you need? And then, so we told him we needed raisins and some yeast, and they cooperated. We made the raisin jack, and it was just about ready to drink. But this bomb hit, and it tipped the darn thing over. Well, if the raisins got into the pump, it would block the pump up, and the thing wouldn't be no good. So I didn't know. Should I watch the switchboard first? Which I did. That was my job, and I made sure everything was good. And I pulled the grate up, and there was a big water pipe underneath it, and I sat on the water pipe to take the raisins and on a dustpan with a broom, fox broom they call it, and I was just about ready to lift this up and put it into the wastebasket. And a lieutenant commander snuck in on me. I didn't see him coming, and he said, What are you doing down there, sailor?" And I said, I'm cleaning up the debris in the bilge so that it doesn't plug the damage control pump up." And he said, "Well, that pan looks like that's full of raisins." I looked at the pan, at the dustpan, and I says, "You know, sir, it does look like raisins, doesn't it?" He said, "Well, carry on. I'll be back to check you." So I dumped the raisins. I finished the job, and eventually it all worked out. I never got put on report, so we lost the raisin jack, I'm sorry to say. After being in all the different battles and 2 typhoons, our ship was damaged in Okinawa by a kamikaze who hit the back of number 1 elevator. The number 1 elevator blew up in the air. A sailor from another ship by took a picture of the elevator on top of a puff of smoke. And that elevator, I think, weighed 6 ton or 7 ton. And it was a good thing that it did not come back down on top of the ship, because it probably would have sunk us. That was the experience that I had. When we had burial at sea, a very sad time. We always usually dressed up in whites, our white uniforms. We had to stand on the hangar deck at a certain spot, at attention, and the bodies were wrapped, not in anything particularly. It was what they call an oversized mattress cover. It's like a pillowcase, only it's big enough to go over a mattress. There were times when we had 10 and 12 bodies that were going to be committed to the ocean, and they blow taps, say a prayer, and they lift the plank up, and the body slide into the ocean with a 5-inch shell inside the case, that's sad to see your buddies being put to sea, you know. I was able to get back to my hometown of Platteville, and my mother was happy to see me, but there was no fanfare. But it was just, I got there in Dubuque, Iowa, and I had to hitch a ride on the USS, the Postal Service, because the Postal Service was picking up the mail in Dubuque to haul to Platteville, and I was able to help him unload the mail. And he was not supposed to give me a ride because that was against the postal regulations. But he saw where I was on my way home, and when I got to Platteville, we all greeted each other, and I was there about 2 or 3 days, and a knock came at the door. And I says, "Ma, there's a knock at the door. You want me to answer it?" And he says, "Yeah, go ahead, but son, because I'm busy making the supper or the dinner, whatever it was." And so I went to the door, and it was Western Union. We have a telegram for Mrs. Joseph McCabe. And I says, "You got a telegram, Ma, do you want me to sign for it?" And he says, "Yeah." So I signed for it. And then he thanked me, and I tipped him, and he went out. So I opened the letter up. It was a telegram from the United States Navy Department. And it stated, "Dear Mrs. McCabe, we are sorry to inform you that your son, Robert L. McCabe, 6219555, was killed in action." I says, "Well, I'm not dead." And I said, "Did you get the $10,000 yet, Ma?" She said, "No, son, why?" I said, "Well, because I'm dead." So we laughed about it. But my assumption is there was another Robert L. McCabe, 6219555, from Tacoma, Washington. I went to a ballroom in Minneapolis, and I met a girl, and I danced with her, and I asked her where she was from. And she said she's from Norway. And I says, "Well, that's nice, I'm from Finland." And eventually we set up a good mutual understanding of each other, and she didn't tell me it was Norway, Michigan. She told me it was from Norway. And I assumed that was Norway over in Europe. But our relationship blossomed, and we decided after about a year and a half to get married. After we got married a while, she wanted to know things about me, and I explained to her, and I asked her, what did she do during the war? And she said, well, we were very important. We were sky watchers. I said, what the hell is a sky watcher? What did you do? And she says, well, I used to go to the McKinley school in Norway. They had a kind of a bell tower up above, and we would spend hours up there watching for planes, and then we were supposed to notify if the plane was coming over. I think probably the most important thing in life was my attitude that I was taught by my mother, that you have to not listen to what other people can do for you, but what you can do for yourself. And with that attitude, there's no way you are a loser. You're a winner all the way. And with the United States Navy, I was taught I could have been a hood, probably, because I didn't have a father, and because maybe it was poor. I never knew I was poor, but yet in the same respect, to take me, who had nothing to begin with, and developed into the man that I am now, I am very happy, and I thank God every day of my life. That's probably what I would like my children to be able to handle. And if they can do that, the world is theirs. They can do it. They can do it.